Imagine for a moment that you are a soldier of the Imperial Guard. You have spent weeks in a living hell, fighting against enemies that defy the laws of physics, monstrosities of flesh and warp fire that scream with voices meant to shatter the human mind. Your regiment is broken. Your ammunition is spent. You are praying to the God Emperor for a swift death, anything to end the madness. And then the sky tears open. They descend in storm ravens of gunmetal silver, teleporting into the fray with a crack of displaced ozone. They are giants, clad in armor inscribed with words that hurt your eyes just to look at. They move with a speed and precision that is post-human, wielding nemesis force weapons that banish the demons back to the Imperium. In an hour, the battle is won. The impossible has been achieved. You are alive. You turn to thank your saviors, tears of relief streaming down your face, believing that the Emperor has sent his angels to deliver you. But as the smoke clears, you notice something chilling. The silver giants do not celebrate. They do not offer aid to the wounded. They form a perimeter, their bolters leveled not at the horizon, but at you. In the orbit above, the dark hulls of the Inquisition's black ships eclipse the sun. The Voxcasters crackle to life, but they do not transmit orders for extraction. They transmit codes for sterilization. This is the grim reality of the Grey Knights. They are the Imperium's ultimate weapon against the Chaos Gods, a chapter so secretive that their very existence is a myth to the wider galaxy, and that secrecy is bought with blood. To the common citizen, to the brave guardsman, and even to other space marines, being saved by the Grey Knights does not mean survival. It often means you have simply traded a death by demons for a death by execution. You have witnessed the unseeable. You have looked upon the layout of the warp and survived. In the eyes of the Ordo Malleus, you are no longer a soldier. You are a loose thread. You are a potential carrier of a chaotic infection that could doom entire sectors. And the Imperium of man, in its cold, ruthless calculus, does not take risks with contamination. Salvation in the 41st millennium is just another word for a death sentence. To understand the butchery of the innocent, we must first understand the nature of the secret being kept. The Grey Knights are not merely another chapter of the Adeptus Astartes. In the labyrinthine records of the Administratum, where the names of the Ultramarines or the Blood Angels are eulogized in high Gothic script, the Grey Knights simply do not exist. They are the Chapter 666, a designation that is intentionally omitted from the Imperial rolls. They are the Chamber Militant of the Ordo Malleus, the Demon Hunters, and their mandate is absolute: to oppose the great enemy in its purest, most horrifying form. Most threats to the Imperium are physical. An orc relies on brute force. A tyrannid relies on biological consumption. These are enemies that can be seen, fought, and understood without risking one's soul. But the threat of chaos is fundamentally different. Chaos is not just an invading army. It is a pervasive, insidious corruption that attacks the very fabric of reality and the sanctity of the mind. It is a spiritual cancer, and like a cancer, it spreads through contact. This is the cornerstone of the Ordo Malleus's philosophy. Knowledge itself is a vector for infection. In the grim darkness of the far future, ideas are dangerous. To know that there are gods in the warp who hunger for your soul is to open a door in your mind to them. A frightened citizen whispering the name of a dark god in a moment of despair can become a beacon for a demonic incursion that swallows an entire hive city.
Therefore, ignorance is not just bliss. Ignorance is the most formidable armor humanity possesses. The Grey Knights are the guardians of this ignorance. They are weaponized psychics, conditioned to withstand the whispering madness that would break a lesser mind. But the common man possesses no such defense. When a guardsman witnesses a bloodthirster of corn ripping through a tank, or sees the laws of physics dissolve into warp stuff, his mind has been compromised. Even if he survives the battle, he carries the memory, and in that memory lies a dormant seed of corruption that could bloom years later, or spread to others through his tales of the nightmare. Thus, the Edicts of Secrecy are enforced with zero tolerance. The logic is brutal, but from the perspective of the Inquisition, it is necessary. To allow a witness to live is to allow a carrier of the plague to walk free among the population. The Ordo Malleus operates on a scale where the lives of individuals, even millions of them, are meaningless variables in the equation of racial survival. They are not cruel for the sake of cruelty. They are cruel because they believe the alternative is the extinction of the human soul. This creates a tragic dichotomy. The Space Marines of other chapters are hailed as the Emperor's angels of death, symbols of hope to be rallied around. The Grey Knights, arguably the most potent and heroic of them all, must remain ghosts. They fight a war in the shadows, unthanked and unremembered. And for those unfortunate enough to see them step out of the shadows, the penalty for piercing the veil of secrecy is absolute. The quarantine must be maintained, no matter the cost in human blood.
The Imperium of man is built upon a rigid caste system, and this inequality extends even to the manner of one's silencing. The Edicts of Secrecy are not applied blindly. They are a calculated bureaucratic protocol that weighs the value of the individual against the risk of the secret. The fate that awaits a witness depends entirely on who they are, how valuable they are to the war machine, and how much political power their organization wields. At the bottom of this grim hierarchy are the countless billions of the Imperial Guard and the common citizenry. For them, the equation is simple and merciless. They are expendable. The Imperium possesses a limitless supply of human bodies, and the cost of replacing a regiment is infinitely lower than the risk of a single demonic seed taking root. When a conflict involving the Grey Knights concludes, the inquisitorial cordon descends. Regiments that fought with valor, who held the line against the horrors of the warp, are rounded up. There is no trial. There is no debriefing. Often they are simply executed. Mass graves are dug by the very soldiers who will fill them. Commissars, who hours before were inspiring their men to acts of heroism, are now tasked with the final betrayal, organizing the firing squads. In other instances, where the waste of manpower is deemed too high by the Departamento Munitorum, a fate worse than death awaits. Entire populations are gathered into colossal transport void ships. They are sterilized to prevent the taint from passing to offspring, and then shipped off to brutal labor camps in the darkest corners of the galaxy. Here they will work until they drop dead from exhaustion, stripped of their names, their history, and their dignity. They are liquidated in the slowest, most profitable way possible. Moving up the hierarchy, we encounter the Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines. Here, the Inquisition faces a dilemma. A Space Marine is a biological miracle, a resource that takes decades and immense resources to cultivate. To liquidate a chapter that witnessed the Grey Knights would be an act of strategic suicide. Furthermore, the Astartes are genetically engineered to be resistant to corruption,
and they possess a political autonomy that the Imperial Guard lacks. You cannot simply light up a company of Ultramarines and shoot them without starting a civil war. Therefore, the protocol for Astartes is the mind wipe. It is a violent, invasive psychic surgery performed by the Grey Knights librarians or inquisitorial psychers. They delve into the Marine's mind and excise the specific memories of the campaign. This is not a gentle fading of recollection. It is a brutal cauterization of the neural pathways. A Space Marine might wake up in his apothecarion with days or weeks of his life missing, feeling a phantom ache in his soul where the memories used to be. But this procedure is not without costs. The mind of an Astartes is a fortress, and breaching it causes damage. Reflexes can be dulled. Combat instincts can be shattered. A warrior might lose not just the memory of the daemon, but the memory of a brother who died saving him. He forgets the lessons learned in blood. In severe cases, the mind wipe leaves the Astartes a husk of their former self, combat ineffective and broken. Yet, the Inquisition deems this an acceptable loss. A broken Marine is better than a corrupted one. Then there are the exceptions, the High Lords of Terra, the Inquisitors themselves, and the Navigators of the Novus Nobilitae. These individuals are deemed too vital or too powerful to touch. They are trusted to bear the burden of the secret, bound by terrible oaths and the constant suffocating surveillance of the Ordo Hereticus. It is a hypocrisy that stings bitterest of all. The weak die for seeing the truth, while the powerful are permitted to live with it, protected by their station. This hierarchy creates a profound sense of isolation for the Grey Knights themselves. They are the saviors who must kill the saved. Every victory they achieve is followed by a massacre of their allies. They walk a lonely path, knowing that the people they protect can never know their names, and if they do, those people must die. It is a burden of guilt that would crush a normal man, a testament to the psycho-indoctrination that strips the Grey Knights of their human empathy, leaving only cold, hard duty. The universe of Warhammer 40,000 is vast, and its secrets are buried deep beneath layers of propaganda and lies. We are dedicated to excavating these truths, no matter how uncomfortable they may be. If you want to join us in decoding the grim reality of the 41st millennium, if you want to understand the lore beyond the surface-level battles, then subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Join our silent Imperium. We have many more files to decrypt, and we need every operative we can get. Now, let us turn our gaze to the most infamous example of this protocol in action, a moment in history when the irresistible force of the Inquisition met the immovable object of the Space Wolves. Let us discuss the Months of Shame. If the standard operating procedure of the Ordo Malleus is a tragedy, then the events following the First War for Armageddon are a crime against history. This conflict, known to the few who remember it as the Months of Shame, stands as the ultimate case study of the Imperium's internecine madness. It was here that the irresistible force of inquisitorial dogma collided with the immovable object of Space Marine honor, and the sparks from that collision burned entire worlds. The context is vital. The First War for Armageddon was not a skirmish, it was an apocalypse. Angron, the demon primarch of the World Eaters, had descended upon the Hive World. The defenders, including the courageous Armageddon Steel Legion and the Space Wolves, had been pushed to the brink of extinction. It was only the arrival of the Grey Knights, led by Brother Captain Aurelian, that turned the tide. At great cost, with Aurelian himself falling to banish the Demon Prince, victory was achieved. The demons were cast back. The world was saved. But as the ash settled, Lord Inquisitor Gesme Kisnaros arrived to secure the peace. His solution to the taint of Angron's presence was absolute, the total sterilization of Armageddon. He decreed that the entire population of the planet, along with every surviving soldier of the Steel Legion who had fought so bravely, be placed in forced labor camps to die a slow, rotting death. Kisnaros viewed them not as heroes, but inevitable incubators for chaos. Logan Grimnar, the great wolf of the Space Wolves, refused to accept this. To the Vulca Fenrica, honor is everything. These humans had fought beside them. They had bled for the Emperor. To butcher them after the victory was a betrayal of the very ideals the Imperium claimed to uphold. The Space Wolves argued that a warrior who survives facing a demon Primarch has proven their purity, not their corruption. But Kisnaros was a man of the book, and the book said purge. When the Inquisition began loading the survivors onto massive transport ships to be ferried to their doom, the Space Wolves did something unprecedented. They broke the Imperial quarantine. Their strike cruisers moved into defensive formations, escorting the refugee ships, trying to guide them to safety in other sectors. They broadcasted warnings to the Inquisitorial fleet. Do not fire. These are loyal subjects. The Inquisition's response was cold-blooded murder. Under Kisnaros's orders, the Grey Knights and the Inquisitorial warships opened fire not on the Space Wolves initially, but on the defenseless transport ships. In the void of space, millions of survivors who had just lived through hell were vaporized in seconds. The Space Wolves watched helplessly as the people they had sworn to protect were turned to expanding clouds of debris and frozen corpses. The conflict escalated into a civil war in all but name. Space Wolves' ships engaged Inquisitorial vessels. The Grey Knights, bound by their duty to the Ordo Malleus, found themselves teleporting aboard the ships of their cousins, the Sons of Russ. Brother fought brother. Bolter rounds designed to slay Xenos cracked against power armor forged by the same Mechanicus forges. The Grey Knights, efficient and emotionless, killed wolves. The wolves, fueled by a righteous feral rage, killed knights. It was a senseless waste of the galaxy's finest warriors. The madness culminated in the ambush at the parley. Under a flag of truce, Kisnaros and Grand Master Joros of the Grey Knights met with Grimnar. But the Inquisition had no intention of talking. They opened fire on the Space Wolf fleet while the negotiations were underway. In a fury that is now legend, Logan Grimnar cut down Grand Master Joros in a single stroke and teleported out, escaping the trap. The war came to the doorstep of Fenris itself. The Inquisition laid siege to the homeworld of the Space Wolves, a move of staggering arrogance. It was only the awakening of Bjorn the Fell-Handed, the oldest living dreadnought, a warrior who had fought beside the Emperor himself, that ended the madness. Bjorn shamed the Inquisition, forcing them to realize the sheer insanity of destroying a first founding chapter over a bureaucratic dispute. Kisnaros was slain by Grimnar in the final battle, and the Inquisition retreated. But who won? No one. The months of shame ended, but the damage was absolute. Most of the population of Armageddon died in the labor camps. The refugee ships were largely destroyed. The Grey Knights lost a Grand Master and countless Terminators. The Space Wolves were left bitter and disillusioned, their trust in the Imperium's institutions shattered forever. This event reveals the terrifying truth of the Witness Protocol. It is not just a rule, it is a dogma so rigid that the Inquisition was willing to risk a civil war that could have crippled the Imperium just to ensure that a few million laborers didn't live to tell a story. It proves that in the eyes of the High Lords, the preservation of the secret is worth more than the preservation of the Empire itself.
We have spoken of the edicts and the politics, But we must now descend into the visceral reality of how these orders are executed. The Imperium does not simply ask you to forget. It surgically ensures that you cannot remember. The mechanisms of oblivion are varied, ranging from the esoteric to the brutally industrial, but all share a common purpose: the absolute sanitation of history. For the Adeptus Astartes, the process is a violation of the sacred. A Space Marine's mind is a carefully constructed weapon, conditioned by hypnotherapy and psycho-indoctrination. To tamper with it is to risk dismantling the warrior entirely. When a mind scrub is ordered, Grey Knight librarians or high-level inquisitorial psychers undertake a telepathic invasion. They do not merely suppress memories, they hunt them down. They trace the neural pathways where the image of the daemon is stored and burn them out with psychic fire. The subject is often strapped to an apothecary's table, sedated but conscious enough to feel the intrusion. It is described by survivors, those who retained enough sanity to speak, as the sensation of a hot needle being pushed slowly through the eye and into the soul. The psyker must distinguish between the memory of the Grey Knights and the memory of combat tactics. It is a delicate surgery performed with a sledgehammer. Often, the separation is imperfect. A Marine might lose the ability to recognize his own squad mates or forget how to strip his bolter. In the worst cases, the trauma induces a catatonic state, leaving the Angel of Death a drooling husk, fit only to be euthanized or repurposed as a combat servitor. For the unaugmented human, the methods are far less sophisticated and far more efficient. The sheer volume of witnesses, often numbering in the millions after a planetary siege, makes individual psychic surgery impossible. Instead, the Imperium turns to industrial-scale processing. The primary tool is the chem-gelled and the labor camp. Survivors are herded into processing centers that resemble slaughterhouses. Here, the first step is often the removal of the capacity to communicate. In strict quarantine zones, medical servitors perform mass glossectomies, the surgical removal of the tongue. If you cannot speak, you cannot spread the heresy of what you saw. In more extreme cases, auditory implants are severed to deafen the subjects, isolating them in a world of absolute silence. They become living vaults, locking the secret inside their own rotting bodies. Following this, sterilization protocols are enacted. The logic is that the taint of chaos might be genetic, or that the trauma of witnessing the warp might be passed down through epigenetic markers. The Imperium takes no chances. Entire bloodlines end in these camps. The chemical castration is swift, impersonal, and absolute. Finally, these broken, silenced, and sterile masses are not wasted. The Imperium feeds on labor. They are shipped to penal worlds or hazardous mining asteroids. There they are worked to death in toxic atmospheres or high-gravity environments. They are given a number, stripping them of their names. The Edict of Oblivion ensures that their death records list plague or industrial accident as the cause. They die knowing the truth of the universe, but unable to whisper it to a single soul. They are the dust upon which the Golden Throne rests, ground down to keep the secret of the Grey Knights pristine.
It is easy to look upon these atrocities, the mass graves, the silenced witnesses, the betrayal of heroes, and condemn the Imperium as a monstrous regime. To the modern moral compass, the actions of the Ordo Malleus are indefensible evils. But to understand the 41st millennium, we must discard our modern morality. We must look through the eyes of men and women who wake up every day knowing that hell is not a metaphor. It is a dimension next door, scratching at the walls of reality. The defense of the Inquisition is rooted in a terrifying utilitarian arithmetic. They argued that the threat of chaos is asymmetrical. It takes millions of soldiers to hold a planet, but it takes only one compromised mind to lose it. A single rogue psyker, infected by the memory of a daemon, can become a living portal. Through that portal, the warp spills forth, consuming not just a city, but an entire system. If the price of preventing a system-wide exterminatus is the death of a few million witnesses, the High Lords view that as a bargain. Consider the alternative. If the existence of the Grey Knights and the specific nature of daemons became common knowledge, panic would shatter the Imperium. The belief in the Emperor's omnipotence is the glue holding humanity together. If the masses knew that there are things the Emperor cannot simply wave away, things that require the slaughter of his own people to contain, faith would crumble. In the void left by faith, despair enters, and Nurgle, the plague god, loves despair. Therefore, the Grey Knights act as a firewall. They are the final sanction. The cruelty is not a byproduct of the system. It is the system. It is the immune response of a dying galactic organism attacking its own healthy cells to prevent the spread of a terminal cancer. The Inquisition believes that it is better that we all burn in the fires of tyranny than for a single one of us to fall to the predations of the warp. However, there is a counter-argument, often whispered by radical inquisitors and rebel philosophers. They ask, does this cruelty actually serve chaos? Corn cares not from whence the blood flows, only that it flows. By butchering its own loyal population, is the Imperium not offering a tribute to the blood god? By ruling through terror, are they not feeding the very emotions that strengthen the dark gods? The tragedy of the Grey Knights is that in their desperate bid to save humanity's soul, the Imperium may have already sold it. They destroy the very humanity they claim to protect, leaving behind a husk that is pure but hollow.
Ultimately, the Grey Knights stand as the defining paradox of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. They are the most noble of warriors, incorruptible and pure, yet their legacy is paved with the bones of the innocent. They are the shining armor covering the Imperium's rotting wound. To be saved by them is a curse. To see them is to die. And yet, the terrifying truth remains. Without them, humanity would have perished eons ago. This is the price of eternity. The Imperium has survived for 10,000 years, not because it is good or just or right. It has survived because it is willing to do the unthinkable. It feeds its own children into the furnace of war to keep the engine running for one more day. The citizens of Armageddon, the soldiers of the Steel Legion, and the countless unremembered dead, they are the fuel. Their silence buys the galaxy a few more moments of existence before the clock strikes midnight. So, the next time you look up at the stars and pray for salvation, be careful what you wish for. The Emperor's angels may hear you. They may descend on wings of fire to banish the darkness. They will save your soul from the demon, but they will not save your life from the silence. And now, you too know the secret. You have peered into the forbidden archives. You know the cost of the Grey Knight's purity. In the eyes of the Ordo Malleus, you are now a witness. Let us hope, for your sake, that the screen you are watching this on is secure, because in the grim darkness of the far future, there is no innocence, only degrees of guilt.